so much for coming in today.
Oh, pleasure.
It was amazing that you accepted the invite today because I have read your debut book, Ellie Pillai is Brown, and I have to say that I think there's an Ellie in all of us first generation South Asian women. There are so many moments in it that really resonated with me, and I just became that sort of young, vulnerable 15-year-old with a complete identity crisis that I had for a very, very, very long time. And I just want to know from you, what inspired you to write this book?
Can I just say, I knew you would get it 100% because the name of your podcast is Too British to be Asian, which is probably like the subtitled name of Ellie Pillai.
It could be my diary.
It really
could be my journal.
So I feel like you would totally get it. And I think, like, basically the reason I kind of wrote it is, I think we've all kind of got that 15-year-old inside. And I think what the book is about is not just about Ellie, but other characters in the book who are all kind of trying to find that sense of identity, and that's everybody from her to her mum to her grandmother to her best friend. And it's just something I think, particularly as women, that we're just constantly like evolving, and we've always got a bit of an identity crisis going on. And I think there's so much like pressure to kind of fit into these different molds of who we should be as like teenagers or as young people or as mothers. And I think when you add the extra layer of like the South Asian identity to it, there's just kind of so much there. But I basically kind of sat and wrote the book because I just felt like there was a massive lack of representation in these kinds of books. And I was sort of going through this phase of watching like loads of like nostalgic films and like all this stuff from the 90s, and you know, it's all this kind of feel-good stuff. And then I just was like, there's not a single person in this that looks like me.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking a lot about growing up. And I know you must have had the same thing, where you're just like, okay, who was the big South Asian Hollywood star, or who was the musician, or who was the person that we looked up to? Well, there wasn't anybody. There was kind of Bollywood, which felt really separate. And then as someone who was in between two cultures and didn't really feel like they got that, and didn't really feel like they kind of fitted in anywhere,
100%.
There was just nothing that kind of spoke to me and made me feel like I wasn't alone. So I kind of thought, when I started watching all these films again, I was like, something's got to change. And particularly being a mum now myself, I do not want my children to go through the world feeling like they can't take up space and
100%.
like they don't see themselves in the world around them. And I genuinely think that's why our generation particularly have got an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Because we are having to now, in our 40s, make our place.
Yeah.
Because we didn't kind of have that mould when we were kids.
Well, no, we didn't. You know, our parents who weren't born here came with their Indian heritage, so they didn't. They had an identity. They didn't have this complete confliction of being brought up in two cultures.
Exactly.
So we had that in a fight in us that, you know, we had to sort of like try and focus on, you know, some days we had to adapt to the British values, and then other days we had to then revert back when we got home, we had to revert back to that kind of Indian like culture. And it became a crisis. It was a crisis. But you know, what resonated with me is the different kind of subject matters that you actually like cover, because I find that Ellie is on this journey of self-love, a kind of love story, and Ellie's love story to herself. And like a lot of what you said about stuff like colorism, like she wears, you know, a yellow dress, and she's told, like the character in there is told that not to wear the yellow dress because it emphasizes her dark skin, like like these aha moments. And I can kind of like feel, was it quite emotional journey for you to be writing this down?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was a really cathartic experience, and I think a big part of that in some ways was kind of righting some wrongs from my own kind of upbringing, because I really, you know, without giving too much away, I wanted it to be a really joyful and optimistic story, and I didn't really want to delve too deeply into some of the the harsher, brutal realities of being a first-generation immigrant, and how that can be really tough when you're kind of outside, particularly of the big diverse cities. But I think a lot of it was kind of to do with sort of being able to sort of pass on this knowledge that you have as an older person, which is that if you like yourself and you start there, then everything else will come. And I really wish I could like tell that to 15-year-old me and just go, you know what, you're okay. You don't have to look like Kate Moss, and you don't have to, you know, be the coolest kid in school. You don't have to be a doctor. You can actually just learn to like yourself. And I really wanted Ellie to go on that journey of kind of accepting herself and realizing that if she was okay with herself, then she would attract good people, and she would kind of, she would sort of protect herself from the world. And I think, you know, that's definitely something I was not wise enough to know at 15. I don't know about you.
But we weren't told, I think as well.
It wasn't a thing, was it?
It wasn't a thing. No. And also it wasn't a thing for our parents either.
No.
You know, so, and, you know, for them to come over and live in a country where they couldn't speak the language, they didn't understand, it was an alien culture to them. And also, you know, it kind of, they were sort of enticed to come because they were offered so many opportunities, but yet they've come and wasn't so. A lot of racism that was involved in that as well. So I definitely did resonate. But what were some of the real emotional struggles that you had, like writing this book? What did you find difficult?
I think probably just the process that Ellie goes through at the beginning when she feels invisible, I think is something that I felt a lot when I was growing up. And I think if you spoke to people that I went to high school with, they'd be like, well, that's not true. Because I think I was someone that came across as really kind of confident.
You had a public persona.
I had a public persona, but I was the person that would go and sit in the toilets and just have to kind of go, everything's okay, everything's okay, everything's okay. Because I just felt so at odds with everybody, and there was just, you know, where I grew up,
and alone, right? Because there's no one like you,
and no one was talking about it. And I think particularly when we were growing up, it was like I was taught by my parents, as you probably were, like never use the race card. Like I was just always told, you're going to have to just work a bit harder. You're going to have to be better. That's how you get where you need to go. Don't challenge things. Exactly.
It comes across like you've got a chip on your shoulder and
never. Yeah, exactly. It's almost like you had to just gloss over everything and go, I'm not finding this hard, or okay, I'm just going to pretend to not to notice that the bus driver has driven past me for like the 5th day on the road, and you kind of, you sort of laugh about it. And I think there's a lot of kind of, I think that's why the book is humorous as well, because there's such a fine line between kind of comedy and tragedy. But I think some of those things, like thinking about those little microaggressions, which now as an adult I feel I can cope with, and I feel capable. I've got like the sort of like the resilience to deal with it. But when
it's
you're
taking a journey though, it's taking a process.
It's going back to that time of just feeling really vulnerable, and also just not having friends around you who just don't notice it's happening to you. So for me, I really...
Oh God, yes. It's like being in, you know, like being in a group and knowing, having that gut feeling that you know someone has a problem with the colour of your skin, but because they're not outwardly sort of saying it.
It's so funny because that's just so true. And it's just like the number of times I remember like going out in the evenings and just... You'd get to this certain point of the evening and people would have had a bit to drink, and you'd be like, who's going to say it first? Who's going to use the word? And you kind of, this anxiety kicks in. And for me, I just hid. I got to that point, I started going out, and particularly when I got out of my kind of nice little school bubble and we'd start kind of going out properly, you know, you'd get things where someone would just like push you out of the way to like get to your tall leggy blonde mate, and leggy blonde mate would just be like, oh look at me, I'm so, and you'd just be like, he literally just treated me like dirt. This guy's just literally pushed me onto the floor.
Where's your loyalty?
And it's almost, but it's not even, I just don't think they noticed, and it's because you gloss over it and you kind of go, oh, I just tripped or whatever. You just like stuff like that. I think as I was kind of writing it, I kind of, it brought a lot of stuff back, and I just thought, oh God, I wanted to just go back to me at that age and just go, do you know what?
Give yourself
it's
a
gonna
hug.
be all right. Yeah.
Give yourself a hug.
Right. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
That's
as
it.
You say.
But also, what I did find with the book as well, it did cover some universal issues that not, which feels, I feel quite warm to, because at least it's not just us, issues happened like with other cultures as well. But again, wasn't talked about. There's the relationship that one of the characters has. Oh, we can't say too much though, but yeah. But, one of the characters has with another girl, and that's something that I just feel like we're only just starting to talk about now.
Yeah.
Is the fact that the acceptance of not just that you're gay or straight, but actually being bisexual.
Yeah.
There seems to be, certain communities not happy about that because it's greedy, or it's, you can't have both, or how can you be attracted? There must be a preference. But even like those sorts of subjects.
Yeah. I think it's just really complicated because, I think everybody wants to be happy. And to be happy, you just have to accept that different things make different people happy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I feel like I've got to a point in my life where I just want my children to be in a position where they can just choose whoever they want to be with. And I genuinely don't care. And I just will support whatever identity they have.
Yeah.
But that is very different to like my parents or grandparents or family. And I think that's partly an age thing, partly a cultural thing. But I feel like where we are at the moment in the world is that we're just starting to have tough conversations about stuff and go, do you know what? We have to just allow people to be themselves.
Just be.
Yeah, to just be. Like, why is it not okay?
Yeah.
I do find it quite difficult when people are intolerant, because I'm just like, it takes so little to just allow someone to be themselves and just allow yourself to just adapt and change. It's such a small thing, but as we know, it can make such a big impact on someone's life when you just go, yeah, you want me to call you that? That's fine,
people have this conflict of, someone just falls in love with someone. They have to be put in a box of like, but I thought you were straight, but maybe someone has just fallen in love with somebody,
Yeah.
Something I do want to speak about, there's so much I want to speak to you about, but there's one thing I did want to speak about is that you actually covered a part of the story where the mother of Ellie actually starts like kind of going through her journey of starting to kind of like talk about her past and her treatment from her family, and also her own children as well. Like there was a huge death in the family, and how she sort of dealt with that. That's something that is so common, right? Some of the traumas, like the cycle. I talk about generational cycles of trauma that we inherit from our parents, but also they've inherited from their parents.
Yeah.
And that's something that felt quite difficult because there's such a book of triggers, right?
Yeah, it totally is. And I think that whole thing with Ellie's mum is just, it's just the fact that she's come from this family that don't talk about things. And I think that is something in South Asian sort of families where we can talk about everything else, but actually our feelings and kind of like real kind of emotional truths sometimes, someone saying to you, oh, you're wearing yellow, it makes you look dark. You just want to, it's having that moment of going, I'm really offended by that. I actually don't care if I look dark. I think I look great. And I think being dark is great. Like you would just be like shunned by your family for being aggressive. But I mean, I think in a way they'd be like, oh, just, okay, it hurt your feelings, just gloss over it, pretend it didn't happen. There's a lot of that kind of having to do things to make everybody think everything's okay, and it's very much about perception. And I think that's quite hard to grow up in, that sense of like not talking about things because you need everything to sort of look perfect from the outside, or people can hear us, and I think
it's
the
a
more
stigma, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those stigmas that I feel like there's part of me that thinks that generation doesn't even know how to talk about it. Like they wouldn't even understand how to even start a conversation of, please don't talk to my daughter like that. It's disrespectful, but it just didn't happen, did it?
It didn't. And I think something that was really interesting for me is like my dad passed away 18 months ago. And in the kind of years before he passed away, we had some really deep conversations about this stuff.
Wow.
And we talked a lot about how difficult it was for him to come here, how hostile it was. about the fact that he worked a lot of hours and didn't really notice a lot of the stuff that was going on with us. And I told him some of my experiences of things that happened to me, and he genuinely was like, I didn't know that happened. And we started to have that conversation. But
it was normalised, wasn't it? Because
but it took a lot. And he was in his 70s when we were having that conversation. Wow. That is not something I could have spoken to my dad about when he was in his 40s and I was like a teenager. Yeah. He wouldn't have been open to that discussion. But it is interesting how, you know, the world is kind of moving towards this kind of slightly more open-minded kind of place. But I do think there's just so much stigma and there's so much pressure culturally to sort of please people and be the version of yourself that your family wants you to be, instead of just being who you are.
We've been groomed. That's probably not an appropriate word, but it just feels we have been groomed to sort of like follow a belief system that has been going on for a very long time. And it's, you know, it's a lot to do with even years ago, like, you know, we talk about arranged marriages, for example. If we talked about that, the way that women held themselves and actually, you know, would poise themselves and things like that, and how they came across and what kind of career path that they were going through, what they had studied, would determine if they were suitable, you know, for a marriage. And, you know, even stuff, and that was from our parents, right? I mean, that's our parents' generation. Yeah. That's not very far away.
It's not, and I think that's why our generation have got this massive identity crisis, because there's such a such a huge shift between, you know, parents that grew up in kind of like Eastern culture, absolutely ingrained in that, and then came to the West, but still had that kind of Eastern culture inside them, and it was what they knew, and they'd grown up being in the majority, being, you know, part of just the norm, and then came to, you know, the UK, for instance, and, you know, were able to bring that with them. And then us being born here and having to sort of navigate between that and then the West, and trying, as you say, to sort of be this person over here to please this person, and literally walking through a door and having to be someone completely different. And I think that we, as when we're young, we just get through that, and we just do it because we do.
Survival mode.
It's survival mode. And then as you get older, you start to go, trigger, warning, this has happened. And it's something that we're kind of trying to change for our children. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because, you know, Ellie's experience is universal, not just the fact that she's a sort of first generation immigrant and she's going through those experiences of trying to kind of navigate between what her parents want her to be and what she really is, but also just because that identity thing, I think, is everyone. Like, genuinely, you know, 100%. As I said, like, even when my dad died, like, there were so many things that he wanted to achieve that he hadn't got to, or I think we're always in that place where we just are working out who we are, or we're just changing all the time.
100%, you know, and something that I sort of like think is the next sort of generation, because both our children are mixed race, aren't they? So that, for me, you know, when we talk about identity, I always think to my children, because, you know, they're very interested in the Indian culture. But because I was kind of brought up in a very Western, very British sort of household, I'm finding that I've now had to go back, because I don't speak my mother tongue. So that's something that's really difficult, because, you know, if you do study any language, you know, culture is embedded within language. So I feel like it's got to a stage now where I'm going to have to now work with my children and work on culture. And it's actually something that can be quite beautiful, you know. But start speaking our mother tongue and start actually understanding about half of where my daughter is from. You know? And that will be the next, and I'm just sort of like trying to sort of make sure that the next generation doesn't have that issue.
I know exactly what you mean, because I feel that my parents were very aware that we stuck out anyway. So they tried not to do anything that would make us stick out further. So I also don't speak my mother tongue.
Right.
And it's been like a source of like sadness for me that I don't. And I almost feel a bit ridiculous. It's almost, and again, that's the identity.
Do you think you've been cheated?
I don't feel cheated. I just feel a bit like, am I a proper anything? Can I really call myself a proper Tamil when I don't speak Tamil? You know, I'm not really properly English because I can't trace my heritage back. I mean, you know, it's sort of like, you sort of feel like you're not kind of a proper Asian and you're not really a proper English person and you're not really a proper anything because you're this like weird hybrid thing. And I think that's what I love about the book, which is this thing of going, actually, I am a proper something. You and I, we're a subculture. We have created like this kind of immigrant generation. That's what we are.
Does it
like,
make me less Asian just because I don't speak my mother tongue?
No, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
We're just a different generation of that. And I think we're just evolving this idea of what it is to be Asian in the same way that being English can be being brown. It can be being black. It can be being anything. It can mean whatever you kind of want it to.
So let's go back to the actual writing process, because I want to know, have you always wanted to be a writer? I mean, is this something that you've done as in childhood? Is this something that you did, you know, kind of, as you say, journaling? You did some journaling. Is this like the result of that? Or is this something that you just one day, you just had to tell this story?
I think it's a bit of both, weirdly. Right. So I was always somebody that liked to write. And I always was someone that's very dramatic. If something bad happened, I had to just like write it down, you know, how I felt. And I sort of always loved creative writing. And I think, again, I probably would have loved to have been a journalist or gone down a different career path. But I did feel a certain amount of pressure to do something else that was kind of...
So even you still had those expectations laid on you?
I think it was expectations partly that I laid on myself, that I wanted to sort of please my family.
Right.
And I sort of...
Very common again.
Yeah, and I kind of, you know, it's not like they sort of said to me, you have to do this, but I definitely felt pressure that I couldn't kind of do the sort of degree that I wanted to do because it wasn't kind of considered, you know, prestigious enough, if you like. And I think that definitely drove me down a certain kind of path. So... I probably did always want to be a writer, and I always slightly suppressed it. And I have done a lot of writing within my kind of day job and what I do now in kind of advertising. So I have written, but not in a kind of fiction sense or long prose. But it was genuinely that moment of one day just going, I have to tell this story. And I can't, it literally was, I remember sitting in bed and I just wrote the very first line, which is, my name is Ellie Pillai. And that was it. I was just off. It was like, it just poured out of me. Like I had to tell this story. And I just wanted her to have this amazing journey of self-discovery. And it was really satisfying and cathartic to kind of give her this wonderful kind of
were
ending.
Were there not moments, though, that were just so difficult? Like, you just felt, I just can't, and I have to stop, and...
I didn't actually. I really did just kind of... There were bits of it that I really loved writing, like the kind of romance things. Because probably, I don't know what your high school romantic life was like, but mine
zero.
was pretty bad. So it was slim.
I don't think I can even call it a love life.
Do you know what? I'm probably with you there. And I just remember, you know, just always wanting to have one of those dramatic, kind of grand...
Feel good, rom-com.
Someone that just can't get enough of you and is just desperately in love with you. So I just really enjoyed that bit of it, and I really focused on that. I think the family stuff just kind of came really naturally, and a lot of it was just about sort of, you know, forgiveness and compassion. And I know that, like, that's a big part of it, is just her kind of actually going, my parents are people, and they're also going on journeys, and that's, you know, we kind of expect our parents to be perfect, and we're parents now, and we know we're not. So
the characters definitely do evolve, don't they, from the beginning, from the sort of surface level of what we see, to really like kind of digging deep into the kind of like what they're going through, you know. An issue that you brought up in it, the abandonment issue. So although that happened physically in the book, there's also that sort of mental abandonment that a lot of South Asian women get from their parents, that sort of like disconnect.
Yeah.
And I think you highlight that really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing, you know, that Ellie kind of goes through, where she feels a bit like nobody sort of notices her. And in a way, that's why, she sort of allows herself to be invisible, or in a way she wants to not be a bother to anyone. She knows her parents are going through this terrible thing, and actually she's going through it too, but she doesn't want to be a bother. She doesn't want to like be a burden to them. So she sort of kind of hides herself away, and she feels abandoned, but they sort of feel like externally they're looking at her thinking, oh, she's quite together, she's just handling it. But actually it's just because she's trying almost to be quite adult, but she's not an adult, she's a kid. So it's having an impact on her. She's not really mature enough to handle it by herself.
No, and she does handle things by herself, because
she does,
something that I think my sort of one of the terms I use is I have to lead by example. And unfortunately, the example that she is led by is that you just, you deal with things on your own. Something like wonderful as well that you highlighted was something that I think a lot of South Asian girls go through, is the fact that Ellie's mum in it has a very close relationship with Ellie's friend. So they seem to be quite together, like doing lots of girly things together. However, poor Ellie feels that she's, again, that abandonment. So you've got the physical abandonment, but also the mental sort of disconnect, don't you?
I think that's partly, though, Ellie's character, in the sense that she's got herself into this sort of headspace where she's like, my mum's not interested in me, she doesn't care. And actually her mum's like, Ellie's doesn't want to spend time with me, and she doesn't care. So I think it's partly just they're not communicating with each other, so it's a kind of two-way thing.
Very common.
Exactly. Again, and just not talking about it. So rather than going, you know what, Mum, I'd really like you to take me to get my nails done. She just sits there and goes, you've gone with my friend and I'm really upset.
But again, how did we talk to our parents like that? We just wouldn't, would we?
We wouldn't, no.
We wouldn't. We wouldn't say, Mum, can you love me more? Mum, can you spend time with me more? Mum, can we be closer? A lot of girls don't do that. And then I think when girls do that, you're kind of, again, you're dealing with a person that has their own traumas and is teaching by the example that she was taught,
That's it. I mean, we're all just a version of our families. Like, we can't help it. I find that now I'm a parent, I sometimes kind of catch myself saying things.
I do that.
I'm like, what am I doing? Like, my son had to do
was that me or my mum?
Yeah, but like, I can be really, like, I'm going to regret
Ruthless.
saying this now on camera and on this podcast, but I can be really hard on my kids.
Yeah.
I have high expectations of them, and I find myself doing those same things, and I almost am like, it's like I'm parroting the same stuff. I'm like, well, this isn't the sort of house that I grew up in. You're very lucky to have all these things. And aren't you so fortunate? And I'm constantly telling these stories of like when I was younger and where we lived and how we had to be so careful with money.
We are the victims.
100%. And I just think I used to roll my eyes at those stories as a kid. My dad's favourite story, which was like, we had one egg to share between the 7 of us or whatever. I'd be like, oh God, it's the egg curry story again, here we go. And we'd really, because we were so far removed from that. And my kids are far removed from how I grew up. So it's just that thing, isn't it, of just perpetuating the cycle.
How do we end that cycle?
We have conversations like this.
Yes, 100%.
Do you know what I mean?
100%.
That's what you do. Yeah.
I think as well, like when you say like, you do feel it, like even as a parent, I find it very difficult on managing that sort of mixed sort of heritage that they have. On like, sometimes I have to focus on this, but then, from what I know of it, it's not a great thing, part of the culture that I know. So it's really hard to sort of get that balance right, isn't it?
It is. And like, I, like you, don't feel as if I've got enough knowledge myself to impart.
No, that's
so
right.
It's things like
I'm not qualified.
I don't cook. That's it. I've been like hired for this job and I'm a complete fraud. I can't do this. So I totally feel you there. But I think all we can do is try, and also what we're teaching them is our version of our culture, and that's still valid. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Your version of your Indian culture is still Indian culture. Right. It's just your version, not your mum's or your grandmother's and I think that's okay too, to go, do you know what, guys? I don't cook Sri Lankan food.
Of course it is.
Let's go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
That's fine too.
That's right. I totally agree with that, because, you've got to remember, like, we've been born here, but we've gone through the process of being in a British school. You know, a British school.
Yeah.
This is a Christian country.
Did you ever
We
get
have
called
to-
coconut?
Loads. I mean, that was normal.
Yeah.
You know, that was really
that was
normal.
just a normal day.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it. And I think that's a perfect name
Yeah.
for how we kind of almost felt as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I was sort of guided into that sort of route, because obviously not speaking my mother tongue, because and that's one of the reasons my podcast is called Too British to Be Asian,
Yeah.
because when the school I went to had majority was white.
Yeah.
So
same here.
therefore,
Yeah.
I was always going to be more focused and sort of more identify more with my white counterparts. That said, when I went to college, suddenly there was this I was introduced to so many amazing, like Indian cultures, you
Yeah.
know. But unfortunately, I then went through the route of where you from, and that then I was like, Middlesex. I wasn't used to that term.
Yeah.
And then I didn't understand that depending on what I said would then determine for them if I would be their friend or be part of their group, or
Oh my
you know,
God.
you know,
Yeah.
the
That's really
hierarchy
hard. Yeah.
of having the friends from this, I thought, same community. But then I'm now subjected to this internal racism, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hard to cope with.
It is, and I do think that is something that first generation immigrants really have to, really suffer with.
Yeah.
Is that kind of internalized hatred, because
Yeah.
you don't know who you are and you don't kind of know who you should identify with, and actually realistically nobody. You
No.
kind of are a bit like, well, I don't really fit into that group. And I'm the same as you. Like, I meet other like Sri Lankan Tamil people, and I'm so,
Please don't say it. Please don't ask the question. Please don't ask the question.
I just feel like I don't like. You said it perfectly earlier when you were like, I'm not qualified.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. But I think it's just like, it's not a job interview. It's
No.
not like, I feel like we have to get to that point where we just kind of shamelessly say, yeah, I'm from Sheringham. Right?
Yeah.
I'm from Sheringham via Colombo,
Yeah.
Sri Lanka. Like,
Yeah.
that is where I'm from.
I mean, they can tell by your accent, right? You like me. You don't have a twang.
No.
You don't have any of that. So when people used to meet me, they used to go, "Oh my God, like your voice. You could be in EastEnders." Like, firstly, love to be in EastEnders.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, like. Straight away when I'd speak, that would be it for some people, too British to be Asian. Like,
I used to get this thing all the time when I got married, and I sort of legally changed my name, which mostly was just to do with the fact that I was travelling with the kids, and my children are mixed race, and they were really fair when they were born, and everyone always thought I was trying to
abduct them.
So I thought it'd be easier if we all travel on the same name. So I just remember working with people and emailing them, and then we'd meet in person. I'd see this almost like visible kind of,
That's right.
oh,
Because your name is Christine. Like, my name is Sharon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd have that little moment, whereas, when it's Christine Pillainayagam, which is my maiden name and what I think of as my authentic name.
Who you are.
It's who I am. Like, it's just like, you see it straight away. But at the same time, again, I'm kind of struggling with myself of just saying, but I don't need that. I shouldn't need to be called Pillainayagam to be Sri Lankan, Brown, Tamil, whatever it is. I should just be allowed to be
me.
That. Yeah, exactly.
Just be. Like,
so that's the bit that we're trying to do for our kids. That's what my book's trying to do, to kind of go,
And I think you do it really
openness.
well.
Yeah.
I think you do it really well, because it has to start for some truth, right? We
Yeah.
have to. And, I want to know what's next. Is this a series? Is this a Netflix series?
I wish.
Yeah.
So it is a series. So there's another book coming out next March, I think.
Amazing.
So it just kind of continues Ellie's story. And that's kind of where it is at the moment. And I'm working on some other stuff too. But yeah, I love her as a character. I think she's
her.
I think there's so...
How could you not resonate? Like, how could you not, identify with her, though?
I think she's just your classic teenager, regardless of her colour. She's just that person that is kind of going, like all teenagers are, they all want to fit in, but actually there is no such thing as fitting in.
No.
Like, there is no... So it's just about kind of making your own space, isn't it? And I think that's
Yeah.
the journey that she goes on. But I think it's the one that all teenagers go on, where they kind of just want to get invited to the right party or wear the right trainers or whatever it is. And actually, they kind of just need to be themselves and work out that's the coolest thing to be.
And everyone should be reading this book.
Aww.
Because I just feel like people are just missing out not reading it, because it really does hit home. There's some real parts that you're sort of cheering the characters on, but there are some real parts you think, oh yes, like that was me. And Ellie's okay, I'm okay, you know?
Definitely. And I think she sort of is someone that is going to keep evolving.
Yes.
So I don't think that she's kind of at this point where she's like suddenly reached this kind of aha moment and everything's fine. I think she's going to do what we all do, which is go, oh, I've worked out how to do everything properly, and then she'll get it wrong again.
Yes.
Or like she's going to go through that kind of process.
Yeah, that we do our whole life.
Exactly. I don't think that ever stops until the day we stop breathing.
I know.
It's just change.
You have to come back and talk about your next book thing.
I would absolutely love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on my platform.
And by the way, the yellow looks amazing. Never not
honouring
wear
the book.
yellow.
Honouring the book.
Yeah, your whole palette.
Yeah.
It's like you've dressed for it. It's amazing.
I know, definitely. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you very much.